coming and being here with us today. Welcome to the Miami office of Shutts Bowen. My name is Maria Sklar. I'm a corporate attorney here, and I will be your moderator for today's panel discussion on the Disgruntled Employee. Now, I won't go into too much detail because you should have their bios in front of you. I'd like to present your panelists today. We have Silka Gonzalez, who is the founder and president of Enterprise Risk Management, a company that provides cybersecurity, computer forensics, and technical compliance services. We have Stacy Blau, who is the Chief Operating Officer of 5326 Consultants, Inc., a Miami security consultancy founded in 2010. And we have Miami Shutts Bowen, corporate partner Bill McCullough. What we'll do here today is we'll let them present their topics, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Silka, do you want to get started?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Okay. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Silka Gonzalez. Like she said, I'm the president and founder of Enterprise Risk Management, an information security and training professional consulting firm. We've been in business for more than 20 years. Our headquarters is based here in South Florida, in Coral Gables. We serve 22 industries worldwide. And we're here today to talk to you about a topic that a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention, but we should, because we're having a lot of issues that are happening related to disgruntled employees and insider threat. We're going to cover the topic from 3 different angles. I'm going to cover more the digital side, which is my expertise, and I'm going to talk about every single thing that I'm going to be discussing here we have seen in clients over the years. And I can attest, to you that is a very serious problem. More risky than many of the things that I have seen, the kinds of problems that organizations get because of insider threat and disgruntled employees. Stacy is going to cover more the side of, physical side and the, violence in the workplace and active shooters, which is a topic that we all see that is happening very, very frequently in our society nationwide. And Bill is going to be talking more from the legal perspective. So we're going to provide 3 short presentations from our expertise, and then we will open the room for questions and discussions. Okay? So I am going to, I have limited time, so I'm going to go quickly through my presentation. I have, I want to talk first about some general information about, insider threat and disgruntled employees and some statistics. I want to talk about what exactly is insider threat and these actors, what they do. I want to talk about the kinds of motivations that these individuals have, the different kinds of attacks that throughout the years I have seen in different organizations. And I want to close with some suggestions and countermeasures that organizations can take in consideration for their to implement at their respective organizations. So let me start with information. Every organization here and in general have a lot of information. Today we live in an era that we're drowning in information, and every day organizations have more sensitive information. And so this is a perfect place for someone that that has malicious intentions against an organization, being an employee or a contractor or a third-party vendor that have access directly to the organization. So some of the information that can be exposed can be information that is highly confidential for the entity, information that needs to be protected under laws and regulations or security standards like the PCI for credit card information, financial information, all kinds of sensitive information about personnel, information about all the employees, sensitive information about them, all kinds of information about the infrastructure, the operations, information about intellectual property, the strategies of the organization, the plans, the methodologies, the clients, how they're going to market, patents, all kinds of things. Information about, sensitive accounts and systems that if they're compromised by people like this, can provide access to all information in an entity and potentially change, destroy, or do things that are very damaging for organizations. And when we think about, what are some of the enabling factors that, that we need to consider with insider threat and disgruntled employees, we need to consider the fact that nowadays we're more connected than ever, and we have many, many more devices, from phones to, cloud computing to a lot of people work from home remotely. People travel a lot, they're on the go with mobile devices. We have more and more technology that have IP addresses and connectivity to networks in organizations, like Internet of Things. It could be a camera system, it could be an elevator system, it could be a monitor system. So there's many ways that or people can use as an entry point into an entity to create damage. There's also more many organizations, do not have the security controls to the level that they should have. There's always room for improvement, and this creates an opportunity for these kinds of individuals. Also, like I mentioned before, there's more and more information that is sensitive that is being collected by organizations. So that's another, enabling factor. And finally, there's a lot of organizations are not, providing as much awareness and training as they need about different cybersecurity threats, and that's also a key factor. There's many studies about, what organizations feel about, insider threat. And the reality is that 90% or more of the organizations that are believe that the insider threat is a major problem for organizations, and indeed I can tell you that is true. So let's talk about what is the disgruntled insider. The disgruntled insider is going to be an employee of your entity. It will be someone that could be a contractor, that is not a full-time employee, could be a third-party vendor. But, technically, it's someone that has some malicious intentions against the organization. It's like working with the enemy, okay? That's really what it is, and you don't know it. So you have the enemy inside, and, many times, the disgruntled employees, they feel that injustice has been done to them. Maybe, they were not, they were demoted, or they got a bad, evaluation, or they were rejected for promotion, or there was some type of disagreement with someone in management. They feel some wrong has been done to them, and there's some expectations that have not been met. So that's from the disgruntled employee, typically point of view, that they feel that something wrong has been done to them and they need to get even. But from the other angle, if you might have someone that came with the malicious intentions already, someone that perhaps is doing corporate espionage and came already with an agenda or something that they're trying to do inside the organization. So let's talk about the disgruntled technical insider. We are going to have disgruntled employees that are non-technical and some that are going to be technical. They're both going to be risky for an organization. The non-technical, all kinds of things, and Stacy is going to give you plenty of examples about that. But when you have a disgruntled employee or a problem with insider threat or someone that's highly technical, it's very, very risky, because typically you're giving access to these individuals to the infrastructure and the premises and the systems, applications and data, and typically they have the know-how of how to hurt an organization, where to go and hurt them, and technically, and they typically might have the skill sets to even hide their tracks, so they're not detected quickly or not detected at all. Some of the things that these technical people, will do to organizations might be sabotage, okay, or corporate espionage, or they might, extract information from the organization slowly over time, or different periods. They might access systems and manipulate information. They might destroy things inside organizations or create malfunctions inside the systems. They might, commit identity theft. They might be performing illegal acts. They might be putting, programs with malicious codes inside organizations to do all kinds of, bad things inside organizations. So these people can be quite dangerous, and the problem is that everything is silenced and you don't see it. And if there's no proper security measures and monitoring, they might not be detected for a long time or not detected at all, unless the damage is very obvious, like destroying data or compromising systems that are non-functional. So let's talk briefly about the motivations of these individuals. Some of the motivations of these individuals is, one is, personal gain. They might be doing this because they are extracting information that they could sell to competitors or to other organizations, or in the black market, or they might be extracting the information because they want to use it themselves to compete against the organization that they're working on at the current time. You also have other motivations, like they are after trade secrets. They are after intellectual property that could be of significant value, that they want to extract from the organization. And again, provide this to other entities or use it themselves. They might be the motivation that we see, other motivations, like corporate espionage, where you might have an individual that is working with other individuals or entities. It could be a government, a foreign government that is trying to implant people inside an organization to extract information of some type that they need, that they are looking for. So in those cases, you usually have individuals working with other individuals outside. And other motivations could be, that they're looking for, revenge, and they want to sabotage the organization because they feel that, some wrong was done to them and they want to get even, okay? So let's talk about some of the, attacks, some of them only. And every single one that I'm going to describe here, I have seen in clients, okay? Or organizations that we know. One is, we see in organizations where malware is implanted or malicious code, and it's not detected, in a timely manner, and the malicious codes can be included and enter into the infrastructure to do different things like extract data over time. It could be used as an entry point, like a backdoor into an organization to continue doing things inside the organization even when they're already gone, like fire. It could be, malicious code that has been programmed in such a way that it will trigger some damage to data, destruction of data or systems at a certain point in time. So the malicious code can be used for many different things. Manipulate data, manipulate systems, extract information, to enter information that is fictitious or that is not real inside the transaction stream of the organization. Other types of attacks are, attacks for illegal activities. We had a case once where we had a group of employees inside a very large entity, inside a IT department that was quite large, where a group of their IT employees were working together and running a business inside a business that was illegal. They were downloading, music and things that were, illegal, and they were selling the materials. And the organization realized this much later on. And the illegal activities could be all kinds of things. Can be, pornography, could be all kinds of things, identity theft, that are happening inside the organization while they're working for your organization. The other one that I think is, very, very, very common, and people don't realize how common it is, when you have information leakage, okay? And when you have information leakage, it is happening in many different ways, and you might not detect that immediately. It might be through the email system that they have at work, or a personal email system. It might be, that the person is taking devices inside the organization, like a phone, or a digital camera, or a CD-ROM, a USB drive, any kind of device that has storage capacity, and connecting that to the network and extracting information from the entity. Also, don't forget the cloud. Now they use a cloud, they're becoming very smart. They like to move the stuff directly to the cloud, to different places in the cloud, and then from there they kind of take it anywhere they want. So we see this frequently, and it's very problematic for organizations. And we also see attacks that are like penetration testing, penetration attacks, or social engineering attacks against organizations where they're targeting organizations they already know to cause them harm. And the third parties, don't forget the third party vendors. Many organizations are outsourcing a lot of services to third party vendors. And and if you have contractors also, don't forget them. Just don't think just about your employees. Think about the contractors and think about the third party vendors and what kinds of controls you have. And the fact that someone is working for you, that doesn't mean that that person has your best interest at hand. So many times we tend to trust the people that are closer to us, but the only thing that they need to defraud you is to earn your trust. That's exactly what they need to commit fraud or to do something bad. They need to earn your trust first. So just to wrap it up here, and so continue with Stacy, some suggestions for countermeasures that you can consider. On the deterrent side and detection side, I will say one of the key things organizations have to do is that they have to implement strong and comprehensive information security practices in terms of the access and privileges that they provide to their employees, to the infrastructure, to systems, to data, and different functions inside the organization, as well as how they monitor their activities when they're working. And that applies to employees, 1099s, or third-party vendors. The other thing is, if you can use products like data leakage products that are, and they're set up properly, they can trigger situations that let organizations know that something is happening. There are other kinds of security products that can be used to monitor the activities of users inside an entity at a very detailed level that should be considered and configured in organizations. Also, the use of encryption, so that if they get information, they might not be able to make sense of the information. And also, from using devices like intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, log monitoring.
What's that word? Intrusion?
Intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems, and using log monitoring tools. You can use log configuration and monitoring at the different levels inside the infrastructure, from a firewall to a router to an operating system and a database, as well as you can have very sophisticated logging monitoring systems that are correlating events. You can also have, I recommend that you do perform assessments on a periodic basis of your system, so you can do like a comprehensive security assessment or different kinds of assessments, like a data leakage assessment, to identify if indeed you have data that is leaking the organization. It's better to know than just to ignore it, so that you can deal with the situation. Also, some other kinds of penetration testings and risk assessments can be very useful, or even a breach assessment can be quite useful. And finally, they suggest that, obviously anything related to monitoring the systems and the users and analytics, products to do analytics of users' behaviors and traffic behavior in the organization, data movement, and things of that nature can be very beneficial. And some other common sense, suggestions: you have good communication in your organization and listen to the opinions of your employees. Pay attention to, the setting the right tone at the top. The management will direct what are the rules and the kind of behavior that we expect and the value systems that we have in the entity and the values that we expect from our employees and the kind of agreements that they're providing their employees or 1099s or vendors to protect the entity, as well as, looking at the infrastructure for possible loopholes that need to be addressed, and checking the morale of the employees and looking at symptoms, red flags of employees. I will give you some red flags that you should look for. Employees that are, that you think that they're dissatisfied, they're making comments that they're unhappy, that they, that they don't like something or someone, or they want revenge. When they start getting angry or screaming at employees or situations like that, be very, very careful with those people. Look at people that they're coming off and off at off hours or during weekends to work. Look at people that are carrying a lot of things or taking devices in and out and connecting them trying to connect them to the infrastructure. So there's a lot of red flags that if you pay attention, you will realize something is going on that is not normal. But you need to pay attention. Also, make sure that you're applying, patches and updates to your systems on a regular basis. We talk about access controls in general. And finally, the last one, which is very, very important, security awareness and training for all your employees regarding how to identify different kinds of threats and how to react to that and protect your entity and themselves. That's all I have. So now Stacy will go into the most fun part of the presentation.
Thank you very much.
So I need to have this in your makeup.
There we are.
All right. Okay, I'm coming through on the mic then. Hi everyone, I'm Stacy Blau from 5326 Consultants. We do a lot of work in the physical security and investigations arena, and workplace violence, unfortunately, is increasingly a big part of our business for all the wrong reasons. Some of the right reasons, though, is that people are getting more and more aware of the need for training and for having a crisis management plan in place. So that's also where we're stepping in. I want to let you all know that I've never done a presentation sitting down. I'm just used to, I feel more in control when I'm standing up, but for our AV system that we have here, I'm going to sit down, but I have to let you know that in advance. We're going to have to bear with me together on this for the first time. It's a new journey. Workplace violence. Why are we concerned about workplace violence? Well, increasingly, unfortunately, especially over the past year, there have been so many high-profile incidents that I don't even really need to explain it all. I'm sure you all saw the news yesterday about the incident at YouTube. It's very interesting. I'm not getting heavily into statistics here because we have a lot of ground to cover, but when we talk about workplace violence, statistically, you're more at risk at being involved in a workplace violence incident than you are in being a victim of a fire, right? That's a pretty stunning fact. There are 2 million incidents every year, but those are reported events. So you can imagine, just like many other things that happen in the workplace, for example, sexual harassment, not everything is reported. So the real number is no doubt quite a lot higher than 2 million events. 5,200 deaths. That's a number that I think we can have a lot of confidence in the accuracy. And that's up. Those are 2016 statistics. That is up from 4,800 in 2015. So 7 incidents per 10,000 workers. That's overall across the board, every sector. As an employee, you are at risk. Every 7 individuals per 10,000 will be victims of workplace violence in any given year. And when we're looking at what workplace violence is, there are 5 general categories. There's so many different ways you can break things down, but there are generally 5 categories. The first is criminal. Criminal is really important, and it's really important because money is so often involved in incidents where violence occurs in the workplace. And anybody who's here from a bank knows that. Banks, we found, are especially attuned to this risk because Every bank is aware of the risk of a robbery. That's never something that you'll hear people put their heads in the sand about in the banking industry. And it's certainly a risk as well for the retail sector and really any place where you have your customer facing. That's where that really large risk comes in. Client and customer interactions, again, public facing, that's a theme here. Oops, I seem to have pressed the button that I didn't mean to press. Anytime you're in touch with people and you're interacting with people, you can't always control who your clients are, and that's going to put you at risk. Worker-to-worker violence. That's when an incident happens in the workplace. A fight breaks out, or an incident occurs, or an employee commits an act of violence. Domestic violence spillover. That's also, unfortunately, a very big one that happens when a partner comes into the workplace and takes the problem that's going on at home and brings it into the workplace. Very significant public incident that occurred here in Miami in that category was the shooting at Equinox Gym in Merritt Park. Most of you are probably familiar with that one. It involved a manager who had been involved with a trainer and who broken up with that trainer and then was involved with another individual. The trainer who she had broken up with was fired and very quickly came back into the gym and shot both the woman and her new paramour. Ideological. Ideological is a big umbrella that encompasses terrorism and not just terrorism, but any strongly held belief, whether it's political or not. One of the misconceptions that people have about terrorism is that we're looking strictly at an international threat, at a Islamic terrorist threat. That is absolutely untrue. The vast majority of terrorist incidents that occur are actually domestic terrorist related. Domestic terrorist related. And when you look at, all the facts are not at hand yet about what happened yesterday at YouTube, but there are some signs that the woman who was involved might have been an animal rights activist. And again, her motivations are unclear, but that would fall into the domestic category. Oh, I pressed it so many times. Okay. All right. So, why a concern over workplace violence? Guns are involved in 80% of incidents. All right, that's why we call them mostly active shooter. Okay, active shooter is a specific category of events that involve guns, but 80% of these incidents are involving guns. All right, it's also so this is a very hot topic and one I'm not going to spend much time on. But guns are obviously a huge risk. Another misconception, though, that pertains to guns is the idea that everyone is using an assault rifle. Everyone is using an assault rifle in these instances. There's no doubt that when a perpetrator is using an assault rifle, that person is able to kill a lot more individuals in a short span of time. But actually, statistically, more people are using handguns. The majority of active shooter incidents are carried out by people using handguns. And in fact, the one yesterday at YouTube, the woman who was the perpetrator was in fact using a handgun. Most incidents are over in under 5 minutes. Let that sink in. That is a really tough statistic to swallow, because what that means is that you're thinking security is going to come rescue you. Security is not going to come rescue you. The police are not going to come rescue you. The police most frequently can't get there in time. All right, maybe the police are on site. We saw what happened really tragically in Parkland with one police officer, which I think we can agree was probably inadequate for the number of people on that campus, 3,000 students, one police officer. But that one police officer, as we know, did not rush in to save anybody. So you're really on your own. That is frightening. That is frightening. So the other threats that exist, physical force, obviously, someone hitting someone else, striking someone else, knives, that's a big one too. Explosive devices, that's a bit more exotic, but we have seen that occur. Columbine is an incident where explosive devices were involved. Who and what is at risk? Well, first and foremost, the most important thing is people. They're the most important thing, right? There's no doubt about that. And for any organization, that's the organization's most valuable asset. So people's lives are being lost, people are killed, people are injured. And I was speaking earlier before the event started with one of our attendees about the trauma aspect of it. People who were injured and survived, people who witnessed the event, people who didn't witness the event but know of colleagues who were hurt or killed. Lasting trauma, and that goes on. Financial losses are significant. They top $121 billion annually, and that's in the United States. That's based on a Department of Justice statistic. And incidentally, if anybody's interested in the grounding of any of these numbers that I'm putting out there, they all are based on numbers that I have dug out of either the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, OSHA, which is responsible for occupational safety hazards. So if anybody is interested in those numbers and where they came from, I'm more than happy to provide that information. Legal and regulatory fallout. That's significant for any organization, especially ones that are from the get-go subject to legal and regulatory scrutiny. Organizations, particularly financial institutions, hospitals, where those obligations already exist and you're under oversight as a matter of course, but not only. You can expect that if your organization is involved in an incident like this, you will have eyes on you from government agencies, and that can be very tough too. And then there's, of course, the media and reputational damage. There is the old expression that any publicity is good publicity, as long as they spell your name right, they say, but I would argue that that's certainly not the case when it comes to workplace violence incidents. So, which industries have higher risk? Everybody is at risk. We know that. We see churches being shot. We see shot up. We see music concerts like the one in Las Vegas. People being killed at venues like that. But some industries have much higher risk than others statistically. And leading that list is banks. Why? Robberies. Banks are number one. But these other industries are also at risk. And you'll see the theme there. So much customer-facing interaction. You don't have control over who's going to walk through the door when you have a hospital, right? And you have all kinds of crazy things going on in a hospital. Same thing for hotels and a number of these other industries. We have a particular problem in some blue-collar fields, manufacturing plants and construction firms. Transportation is a huge one as well, people coming and going. Government. Even taking out the law enforcement personnel from that statistic, because law enforcement is government, but even taking out law enforcement from that figure, government employees are still at a higher risk, public sector employees, than their private sector cohorts. So government employees are at a higher risk. And police and security forces, wow, I didn't even touch that. Police and security forces are the highest of all in terms of injury and death because of workplace violence incidents, 650 per 10,000 compared to the average of 7. And that's, of course, because it's their job to deal with these problems. Who is the disgruntled employee? Silke, you practically you covered it very nicely. You want to look for these red flags in identifying who's a disgruntled employee, and it's not rocket science, right? Because disgruntled means unhappy, and we can tell who's unhappy. Somebody who's disaffected, somebody who's a poor performer. It's typically not your star employee who's a disgruntled employee, although that can happen too. Substance abuse is a very big one. Okay, alcohol, drugs. Unexplained absenteeism, that too. Violation of company policies and disrespect and attitude problems, those go together. Somebody who really just doesn't follow the rules. Those could be your star performers maybe in the right mode, but somebody who's not a good performer and who just doesn't have respect for your company workplace and culture and the rules, those are definite red flags. Somebody who's fired or forced out, that's an obvious one too. But that person immediately is at an elevated risk of committing an act. Cutbacks and layoffs are a problem as well. It doesn't just have to be because, John was a problem individual and we had to fire him for cause. It can be somebody who gets laid off and a group of many dozens or many thousands. So, who is a disgruntled employee who's involved in a worker-to-worker violent event? Well, a current or former employee, that's for sure. Silke helpfully added that contractors, third-party vendors as well can pose a risk. Somebody who has experienced work conflict or losses. So somebody who was denied that promotion, who didn't get that plum assignment, somebody who was involved in a turf battle with somebody else and came out putatively on the losing end. Interpersonal conflicts, those workplace relationships, that can be a minefield. Managers are predominant victims, right? When somebody's unhappy, there's usually a boss who they do not like. And that boss is often someone who is on the other side of the sights of that gun. Right? Somebody who comes back into the workplace, they know where they're headed. All right, signs of escalation and crisis. So we're looking at how do you know when things are getting worse? Because somebody can meet all of the criteria I enumerated on the previous slides, but this person is not going to pick up a gun and harm anyone, right? It takes a special kind of person. And there are signs that are associated with that. So when things cross the line into intimidation and bullying, you know you have a problem. That's a definite red flag. And it doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be physical. Harassment. Sexual harassment is a definite red flag. Property damage. And I'm not talking about somebody destroying a whole information system or something, even a high-ticket item. It can be somebody throwing a stapler across the room. And we've seen that with clients. They say, well, he threw office supplies, but we didn't think much of it. Think something of that. That is not normal behavior. Talk about violence and weapons. Most people telegraph their intentions. So you have people we've seen before, well, this guy, he talks about guns, he's talking about Columbine. Columbine is a major touchstone, not just for school violence, major cultural touchstone. People refer to incidents that occurred previously. They talk about their guns, they talk about weapons. Explicit threats. This seems like a no-brainer, but I can tell you from our experience with our clients that these two go ignored. Why? Well, he didn't do anything. It was just a threat. A threat to commit violence is extremely serious. And then, of course, actual acts of violence against others. Somebody who's involved in fights in the workplace, that should be extremely alarming. And that's really important here, because when we're talking about what we can do in the first place before things start escalating, you have to have good policies in place. So the first thing is, Silka spoke about this, it's culture, it's management buy-in when you talk about workplace violence. Does management really treat this as a serious issue? Is it coming from the top down? Because that's where it begins. All right, so there has to be management buy-in that workplace violence is a problem and that it is not tolerated. And there must be a policy enshrined in your workplace that there is a zero tolerance for workplace violence. Zero tolerance. Things start, and Bill will be speaking in more depth and with more authority on these things, because these can be sticky wickets and minefields from a legal perspective. You need strong hiring practices. Part of that, it starts with who you hire and checking that person out. That is something that we do. We will do background checks, sometimes very extensive background checks on individuals that, go into the dozens of pages. We're talking about information on people, and it's because our clients are deeply invested in knowing that they're hiring the right people. But you have to be careful about that too. So I'll let Bill speak to that in more detail. Solid security. Solid security means a lot of things, but one thing that I will highlight here that it does not mean is I have a security camera, so we're okay. I have a trail that we can use to audit things after the fact on our computer, so we're all right. People rely so heavily on technology, and technology, of course, can do so much for us, but really, at the end of the day, it's about people, and it's about paying attention to the rules that you have in place and enforcing them. That is so important. You need to be strict. You need to have the right policies in place, and then you have to be strict and consistent about enforcing them. And when things go wrong, documenting those things and investigating them and holding people accountable. Another really important thing with respect to policies and standards, I mentioned that zero tolerance policy, so important for workplace violence, eschewing retaliation. Many times we've found that individuals who complain that they were victims of workplace violence are retaliated against. That's an obvious no-no. We've seen so much publicity recently about with the Me Too movement, about sexual harassment and how that's worked. That keeps people silent, and it creates a culture where predators can thrive, predators of all kinds, and you don't want that. You don't want to have created an environment like that. So what can you do? I want to give you some more practical guidelines here. When you're talking about documenting and investigating, that's only when an incident has actually occurred. But sometimes there are signs that things are not right. And we saw that in the shooting in Parkland. How many reports were there that the shooter, Nicholas Cruz, was not right, that there was something wrong, that people actually concretely feared he was going to go back to the school and shoot people? Many people made such reports to various entities, and they did not do really anything about it. That's a problem. But your organization can be different. All right, and creating a feedback mechanism is so important. People do fear retaliation, and that's why it's important that you have an anonymous mechanism to do that. And there are many ways that you can implement that, but that is so important. And you need to do something with that information too. It can't just be sitting there, right? Because you're not gonna make much headway with that. That's a lesson that Our country should have learned a long time ago with 9/11. There were incidents before that. Organizations are finding that they're learning a lesson about this the hard way. You have to have information and do something with it. Otherwise, it's of no value. Employee assistance programs and crisis teams. Those are really critical too. Not every organization is large enough that they have an employee assistance program in place, but a lot of times people are in crisis and they can go a variety of ways, but you want to get them help. So having an employee assistance program is really important. And a crisis team too, if you have an HR office, people who know how to handle this and get people the help they need. Emergency alert system and panic buttons. There are a number of ways to do this, but to explain what this is in an organization, you want to have a way to alert people that an incident is occurring. If an active shooter is on a school campus or in an office, you want to have a way of pushing that information out so that people know. So that people know before the shooter gets to their office. All right, and panic buttons. Those are in place in certain office environments. Sometimes receptionists and gatekeepers have them, banks have them. Certain industries are really good about that, but they probably have a place in more places than we think they do. And it's especially important, gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are not just the security guards at the front. Gatekeepers can often be the person, it can be an administrative assistant, but can also be just the person who's positioned closest to the door, right? Who here has been that person and is always called upon to shepherd people into the office and guide them to their meetings? It's not really necessarily your job, but you're a gatekeeper by default, and you're in a very important position. And an emergency action plan for personnel and management. What is the organization going to do when those red flags come up and you have a person who, oh my goodness, this person, he sounds like he's going to come to the office and shoot someone. What are we going to do now? You need to have a plan in place. All right, risk assessment. That's very important. Silka spoke about that, and this is something that we've worked with Silka on for some clients. Risk assessment consists of looking at what you have now, your policies and procedures, things as they stand now, your facility, all right? And the best way of knowing the weaknesses of your facility is to get somebody in there to exploit them, right? To get somebody in there who's going to walk on in, pretend to be a janitor, pretend to be a visitor. Can they just smile and walk in without a badge? Oh my goodness, we have a badge system. We thought we were safe. We have technology. They're not supposed to be able to get in without a badge, but most of those systems fail because people aren't paying much attention, and a winning smile and confidence will get you in a lot of places where you don't belong. And you got to be looking at those things. So that's what clients are literally hiring us to do, to go in and break into their offices. And we usually don't have to break anything to get in. And then you got to fix the problems. You have to remediate the issues that you identify. So what else can you do? You need to train everyone, right? It's tough to hear the message that you have to invest in yet something else, but that's the reality. So people should know all your policies and procedures that you have. All right, you need to educate your employees on that. And then you need to train them on real scenarios. Unfortunately, most of the training that we've encountered that people are doing for workplace violence and active shooter involve somebody sitting over lunch clicking on boxes A, B, and C, what you do, and you're ready to fall asleep by the end, and you've learned nothing. You've gained nothing, but you have a piece of paper and a certificate of completion, and someone gets to check the box. That's what I call it, check the box training. It's useless. In fact, it's worse than useless because it gives you the illusion of security, and you have none, really. You've gained nothing by doing that. What you need is for people to run through live threats, to understand what it means to run, then hide, then fight. That's the basic mantra. That's the mantra I would substitute instead of hide. It's really barricade, right? Because if you're just hiding, behind a desk, somebody just walks around the other side, they're gonna get you, right? Much better to put a big heavy desk in front of the door, for example, prevent them from getting in, make it just that much harder, because that active shooter is looking to kill a lot of people. He might be looking for, John or Mary or Jane in particular, but usually the active shooter is looking to maximize the number of people that he's killing. And so if you make it just that much harder, you're in a better position. That's what barricading is about. But the key is to build that muscle memory. If you're not physically doing anything, and maybe this is why I like to stand when I give presentations, I need to be physically engaged. And if you're not physically engaged, you're not learning the skills. And a lot of them, they're really just counterintuitive, right? If you can see that a police officer in Parkland, a police officer, couldn't physically muster the courage to go in and do what he needed to do, how is the average person, the average employee, going to react in an active shooter situation? That person is going to freeze. That person is going to panic. That person is going to do all the things that he or she should not be doing to save his or her life. And you have to counter that with training. Practice emergency alert system, right? Sometimes people put those alert systems in place and then they don't work, and they don't realize that until a crisis occurs that didn't work because they weren't using it and practicing it. And when we're saying practice and train, we mean these things need to be done regularly. Sometimes people do it, they think one and done. We did it. We did that 5 years ago. We're good. No, you're not, because that muscle memory is not being built. You get new people, new employees in who don't have the training. You have old people filtering out. You need to do it regularly. We recommend quarterly. And when we're talking about security and police, they're in a totally different category. And the training that they need is vastly different because they need to be able to actually pick up a gun in many cases and eliminate a threat to kill somebody. And I wasn't even touching anything. And it's also, I think, our police are great. Our security is great, and these people do save lives. On the other hand, most police, they are not given the kind of training that SWAT forces have. Most police are simply unequipped to handle active shooters. They're not. They do patrols, they do other things, they don't have the tactical wherewithal. And they need training as well. That's something else that we do. So, when do we usually get called? We talked about all these different things that you can do, the training, the risk assessment. Dollars to donuts, we're going to get called when a crisis occurs. Oh my God, we have someone, he's told us he's going to come back to the office and kill someone. The foreman has reported to us that he overheard the guy in the break room do that. We don't know what to do. Please come help us. That's usually when we get called. So, ideally, if you've reached that stage, what you want to do at that point is still prepare as much as you can. The crisis hasn't actually occurred yet. Nobody has been killed yet. You call us before a problem employee actually gets fired. Because when something like that happens, the person has made the threat, it suddenly becomes very clear to the employer that that person needs to be terminated. And that's a very complex process. You call Bill as well. It's a very complex process, and it's not so simple. And there are a lot of things that go into that. First of all, most people who have been through this, who have not been through this before, think that the police surely will help us at this point. This guy has made a threat. No, that's not what happens. Many times, and it depends. It depends on the municipality. It depends on your organization's relationship with the police. But by and large, the police will not intervene because nothing has happened yet. A crime has not been committed. Now, we live in a moment of heightened tensions. Again, things can be different, but by and large, the police can't deal with every workplace violence possibility that, theoretical possibility that exists. So that's when we get called to come in and help. And we can put a crisis team anywhere, certainly in Miami very quickly, but anywhere within 24 hours. And what we do is we come in, we help analyze the threat. We ask for every bit of information we can possibly obtain on the person. If we can have an HR file, we talk to security, we talk to the people who've been threatened, we talk to the colleagues, we talk to the supervisors, and we try to put together this threat matrix to determine how much this person really is at risk of committing an act. We surveil the problem employee, starting from before the firing occurs. Usually somebody's put on suspension without pay or with pay, but is at home. We recommend with pay. We want the person not to have any other reason to be aggravated. But we're watching the person to learn the pattern of life up to the moment where he is fired. Again, usually by phone, although we sometimes are present physically for termination scenarios and escort people off the premises. But the idea is to know what's this person up to, what's normal for him. And by the way, why do I always keep saying him? Is it because English grammar dictates that he is it's because I think the statistic is 96% of active shooters are men, right? The YouTube shooter yesterday is a distinct exception, distinct minority. So, we're watching. And when the person is fired, what happens afterwards? We're watching this person. And we have him geofenced. We know where he's going. We know where the hot points are. We know where the people who he's been threatening, whether it's a supervisor or the person he harassed or HR. HR inevitably becomes embroiled in these things, right? HR always becomes the enemy because in the end, this person's getting fired. And we watch to see, what's this person up to? Is he moving on, right? We've seen some people who go to the Social Security office. Okay, I got to accept what's happening to me. I got to move on. I got to do the next thing. Or is he going out and buying guns, right? You can tell a lot from watching someone 24 hours a day. We also provide protective security for the places and the people who are most at risk, right? The people who've been threatened or the workplace, the facility where the person might come back to. And then we reevaluate, typically after a week. And that's really the crisis cycle. So, The object isn't to scare you, but it's, as Gavin DeBecker said, it's the gift of fear. You need the right fear. It's a great book, by the way. You need the right fear to know what the risks are and to address them. So, thank you very much. Yes.
Get this loaded.
No, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Quick break.
Okay, well, thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Bill McCullough. I'm a corporate attorney here with Shutts Bowen. And in my role as a corporate attorney, I represent businesses that are large and businesses that are small. And in that capacity, I've seen problems with unhappy employees that take many, many forms. As Silke and Stacy have pointed out, there are some very serious threats presented by such employees, and the law may be good at dealing with some of those and may be good at helping to detect and prevent some of those, but the problems come in more mundane varieties as well. An unhappy employee could come in with a gun and shoot other employees, or an unhappy employee might file a lawsuit, might create a corrosive workplace environment, might steal data. It can do a whole bunch of things to undermine the mission of your organization. And the ones we've heard about so far today deal with malice and criminal activity, but the problems don't even have to obviously involve that kind of activity. A lawsuit, for example, is something where an employee may be entirely within his or her rights to embroil the company in years of litigation and impose massive costs. Isn't doing anything wrong, but is still an unhappy employee, and that unhappy employee is imposing a real cost on the organization. So to the extent we can avoid those things in advance or cut them off early, then we're better off. The law is admittedly better. No policy, no agreement is going to stop a determined workplace shooter. But it may help detect and prevent that kind of thing. But when it comes to some of these more mundane threats like lawsuits and loss of data and so forth, good policies and procedures, good documentation can be very helpful. So I'll touch on a few things today that companies can do to prepare themselves legally. Some of the things I mentioned will be obvious and basic to the large organizations in the audience. Those same things may be impractical and impossible for some of the smaller organizations from a cost perspective, but there's something I think for everyone. So I'm going to present some of my thoughts in the format of kind of the employment cycle. So the first, where do you want to start to try to head off some of the issues your organization may face is with good hiring practices. This is obviously, we use the term gatekeeper in other contexts, but this is where you're seeing problems come in the door for the first time when it comes to employees. So you want to have a good interview process. You want to use that process to explore a prospective employee's background thoroughly. We had an example, we actually have it ongoing now. We're dealing with a client who hired an IT professional and looked pretty carefully at the employee's IT background, but failed to pick up on the fact that the IT professional was previously a financial professional, a broker, and had a series of enforcement actions with the SEC that aren't directly relevant to to the IT role, but that say quite a bit about the employee nonetheless, and the employer failed to pick up on those. So you may want to do background checks to ferret some of those things out. We talked about that, we touched on that earlier, and Stacy can help you with those. But if you are going to do that, be careful, because there are legal requirements, there are consent requirements, notice requirements, and so forth. It may be an obvious thing you do if you're running a daycare center, but you want to have the right documentation in place to make sure that ferreting out those issues in an employee's background don't just create more legal problems than they solve. A very important part of an intake process when you're bringing a new employee in is to make sure you're establishing duties and expectations. Silke mentioned that disgruntled employee is typically someone who has some expectation that has not been met. So they may think, hey, I didn't know I was going to be making coffee for the office, or someone said I was going to be reviewed in 2 months and given a raise if everything was going well. But those may not be the company's expectations, and so it may be worthwhile to put things in writing. We often recommend employment agreements with obviously higher level employees, but those aren't always practical. Sometimes a countersigned offer letter makes sense. Sometimes it can be done with a simple email, but to make sure that an employee knows at the front end what his or her role will be, what his or her compensation will be, whether bonuses may be on the table or not. It's also an opportunity to stress the at-will nature of employment, assuming it is an at-will employee rather than someone who's got a contractual employment term. And that, of course, means reiterating that the employee can leave at any time or could be fired at any time, let go at any time for any reason or no reason. Another thing you want to do on the intake, it depends on your industry and it depends on the role you're filling, but pre-existing commitments, reminding your employees to comply with their pre-existing commitments. This is a situation where you could actually be the victim of someone else's disgruntled employee. So a banker is coming to your office and bringing a big book of business. That's great. That's great as long as you're not going to get a demand letter the next day from the prior employer. So depending upon the nature of the role, again, some employees will have these pre-existing commitments in the form of non-compete agreements, non-solicitation agreements. They may be confidentiality agreements. And you may ask an employee whether they are subject to any such agreements, and they may say no, and they may be truthfully saying no, but it's worth stressing the point and also asking about whether they may be subject to any policies and procedures. We'll touch on that in a moment, but employees may be subject to workplace policies. They may have acknowledged those policies in writing, and they may in fact have contractual commitments. And that's certainly something you'd rather avoid because, again, it can impose a cost. Oops. Yeah, it does. So next step, you've got the employee in the door. The employee is doing a good job or maybe doing a bad job. Communication. Part of the theme here is communication, setting expectations early, but then managing those expectations on an ongoing basis. And that's where periodic employee reviews come in. What's most important, I think, is to keep them truthful, keep them honest. There is an overwhelming human nature to be nice. not with everyone, we've all seen that, but with many supervisors, many reviewers, things get softened in the telling. So it's much easier to tell an employee, especially if it's someone you've got to work with the next day, someone who you rely on to come in with a good attitude and to do a good job. You want them happy, you want them compensated, and it may be easier, especially the larger an organization gets, the more tempting it is to think about your own interests versus those of the organization if you're a supervisor, and so you may want to tell your assistant that he or she is doing a great job and get them as much of a raise as you can, because that way they'll come in with the right attitude the next day. This can impose a huge cost on an organization, because we talked about the at-will employment earlier. We talked about the fact that employees can be let go at any time for any reason. That's generally true, but there are protected characteristics for which employees in many organizations can't be let go. The race and so forth. And if you have so typical, and we've got people in the audience who can attest to this, that people get fired. An organization decides they've got to fire someone for performance reasons. They've been there 10 years. And there's a year of bad reviews, but 9 years of great reviews, because it's easier to say, doing a great job, keep it up, come back tomorrow, until the decision is made that, all right, we've had enough, we can't handle this constant absenteeism or bad attitude or whatever, so it's time to start writing it up. That's the kind of thing that leads to a lawsuit. That's the kind of thing where an employee isn't acting maliciously, actually feels blindsided and may take action and may think, it must be because I'm 60 years old and there's a 40-year-old down the hall, or it must be because I'm black, Latino, whatever. And those problems can be avoided by properly documenting along the way. That's the purely legal side. And then when it comes to some of the more sort of kind of emotional reactions that could come from disgruntled employees, surprises obviously are much more likely to bring about to tip conduct into the negative realm as opposed to the more reasonable realm. So if you're going to throw someone into a rage, it's much easier to do that by surprising them, blindsiding them with some information they weren't expecting. So the review process is important. One of the basic things you can do to try to make it better is some very basic supervisor training. It could be as simple as an email with some best practices and stressing the importance of some of the points I mentioned. Don't leave it to human nature to do a good job here, because it could wind up costing your organization money at best, and at worst it could push an unstable employee toward unreasonable action. In support of a lot of what you may be doing throughout this process, an employee handbook, a good employee handbook, providing, as the subtitle says, providing a professional and safe working environment with reasonably defined standards of behavior. This is one of those things that I mentioned earlier that will be an obvious and basic point to a large organization. It may be beyond the budget of a smaller organization. One of the things that we're tasked with as lawyers here is to be practical and to deal with the big clients and the small clients and to tailor solutions to their budgets and their needs. But a good employee handbook, once your organization is of the size and type to merit it, protects the company. This is a place where you can, as I mentioned, impose standards on protection of confidential information. You can deal with company property, return of how company property can be used, can't be used, use of technology, a whole host of things that directly protect the company's interests. can also protect employees. Sexual harassment was mentioned, and it frankly didn't need to be mentioned because it's on everyone's mind. Policies of that sort do double duty. Of course, they protect the company from liability, but more fundamentally and more importantly, they provide a safe working environment. A good policy in this regard sets forth clear requirements, an effective procedure for making complaints in the event there is problematic behavior, and then a prohibition on retaliation is critical because, well, Stacy mentioned this, the disgruntled employee who acts out in rage can be essentially prey turning into predator because the organization hasn't done right by them. And so by doing right by your employees, you can protect them, but also protect the organization by providing an environment that everyone recognizes as reasonable. In developing any policies and procedures, obviously it's important to consider legal requirements that apply to the organization. So some are obvious. If you're in a hospital, you're dealing with HIPAA. If you're a bank, you're dealing with a variety of regulations. But by addressing those things clearly in policies, obviously you can go further toward discharging the company's obligations and protecting it against liability. Good firing practices are key. This is where call Stacy if there's any doubt, but security is important. It's not just a matter of security. It's a matter of handling the issues sensitively. Typically, we would recommend, if there's not an overwhelming reason not to do it, that firings be conducted in person. Typically, we want at least 2 people in the room. Generally, 2 people in the room. You don't want a big audience, but someone who's actually doing the talking, someone who's observing and corroborating what was said. It's important to be clear why you're letting someone go, but it's important not to be too clear. You want to be general. It's fine to fire someone because of constantly being late turning in work. You don't want to get into an argument over why that report that was due last Thursday was actually turned in on Friday. That's not productive in that setting. Got to be sensitive. Employees are having a very bad day. They're humans. They're going to have emotional reactions. You've got to be ready for that. You've got to treat them respectfully because the attitude of, hey, I'm just doing my job, why isn't this person being more reasonable, is the kind of thing that could push a somewhat unstable employee into a more unstable set of actions. Consistency is very important in terms of reducing legal exposure. You don't want to create arguments of disparate treatment. It's a legal concept that if someone is treated differently because of a protected characteristic, they have a claim against your organization. And so if you're firing someone for being late 3 times last quarter, but you don't fire everyone who's late 3 times in a quarter, then that's potentially low-hanging fruit for a plaintiff's attorney who can look at why you might have done that in this case, but not others. And documentation. You may want a release. You may want something along those lines. Typically, you wouldn't ask for that if you're not giving something in return, so that would come in a severance context. Then, overarching the whole thing, legal documentation. We've talked about a lot of this. As your organization grows, more is going to be in writing. We mentioned the offer letters, the employment contracts, the good policies and procedures. And then the last category I want to mention is often one agreement. I've got it listed here as 3, as a confidentiality agreement, a non-solicitation agreement, and a non-competition agreement. And those are sort of in ascending order of ubiquity. A confidentiality agreement, if your organization has confidential and proprietary information, is kind of a standard, a no-brainer. It doesn't have to be a written agreement between the company and the employee. It can be in the context of policies and procedures that are acknowledged. A non-solicitation agreement is very important if you've got clients or employees that could be taken by an employee and you wish to try to prevent that. Law firms, for example, typically are very light on all of these things, and you'd think law firms protect themselves as well as anyone. But by the same token, lawyers protect themselves as well as anyone, and there's a give and take there in any kind of organization. The next category, non-competition agreement, is a good example. If you could have a non-competition agreement with every employee so that if they're acting as administrative assistant in your office, they can't do that somewhere else within a 5-mile radius, that makes it more likely they'll stay with you, but it's probably not reasonable. These have to be tailored to the organization, the role, but some combination of confidentiality, non-solicitation, and non-competition agreements are things that many organizations need to consider. With that, I think we are at the end. So I guess questions.
Yeah, thank you to our panelists for presenting different perspectives on the disgruntled employees. We'd like to open it up to questions.